What's up, everyone? Welcome to Box Out Banter. Chris Okamura, Jordan Christmas once again. Jordan, we got some spice today.
Yes, I know, but first, I just want to do a quick audible. Just stay with me here. I know our listeners want to hear our thoughts so badly on Bruce Brown being traded to the Brooklyn Nets, but I have something to tell you. I saw Aliens last Thursday specifically.
Okay, the James Cameron one, right?
No, not in the James Cameron movie, or not. I wasn't observing outside or anything. You know, we're in quarantine. The virus is still surging. So, what I mean by I saw Aliens, I was watching the Thursday night football game between the Indianapolis Colts and the Tennessee Titans, and then I saw on Twitter just tweets about these two up and coming high school prospects and a game on ESPN2. So I turned on ESPN2 and I literally saw two aliens walking on the court by the names of Chet Holmgren, who is by ESPN rankings the number one prospect in the 2021 class, and going up against Emoni Bates, who everybody is saying is the best prospect of the decade, and Kevin Durant 2.0. And I gotta say, where these players are going in the future is absolutely ridiculous. You got Chet Holmgren, who posted 31 points, 12 rebounds, and 6 blocks in the game. It was a game between YPSI Prep and Team Sizzle. Not too familiar with I'm familiar with the big high schools, but I wasn't too familiar with Holmgren or Emoni Bates and Team Sizzle and YPSI Prep. But they played on Thursday. It was a battle of the number one prospects. Chet Holmgren, I was very impressed by 31 points, 12 rebounds, and 6 blocks. Was handling the ball with comfort and ease, dribbling up the court, taking over in the fourth quarter, stroking threes, changing numerous shots on the other end. And kind of a reason we were talking about last week why I like Pokusevski is Holmgren is obviously a way more advanced version of that, but that is why you take a swing on somebody like him. But Emoni Bates was impressive too. And I came away in this game more impressed a little bit with Holmgren, although I understand it's one game and I haven't watched that much Emoni Bates tape or film or games. So you can maybe expound on him because I know you like him a lot, but he was impressive too. Effortless score. Both of these kids are competitive as hell. They really took this number one versus number one prospect thing to heart. They were screaming after every basket. Every time a teammate scored, they were into it, passionate, and just the way these kids are developing now, it's kind of scary, but I just wanted to talk about that real quick because these two prospects really were just eye-popping to me, and I cannot wait to track these two, and I know everybody's watching them because they're number one prospects. I'm just saying, I just saw some freaky stuff on Thursday night between these two, just alien-like stuff, and I want you to talk to me more about Emoni Bates because his effortless scoring does kind of remind me of Kevin Durant, and that shouldn't be name we throw out lightly, but that's what I saw. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're absolutely correct. I think the thing so I personally am an Emoni Bates fan. Like I've watched a lot of full games of his, and I'm very excited that he's going to Michigan State.
Yeah.
So like to me, Michigan State's a perfect place where he's going to develop more like discipline. I think the problem with Emoni Bates is he doesn't have like kind of the discipline that you would expect for a player like him.
And he did there were a few times in the game last Thursday where he kind of took, whenever Holmgren would score a three, for example, he would take it personally and just take a bad shot with like early in the shot clock and just bad shots. So
again, then he fits the Durant, like Ingram style, the long, lanky, long arms, can get to the basket, 3-level scorer, that kind of guy. Yeah. And I just think he's so fluid and he scores so easily, like you keep saying. he's not as versatile as Chet Holmgren. Chet Holmgren I haven't watched enough of. I've seen a lot of highlights. I haven't watched full games of his. But Emoni Bates has like the second gear that the second gear that you don't see that often, where if he does take something personally or if he gets hot,
you give him the ball.
You give him the ball and it's over. It doesn't matter how many people you put on him. It reminds me of like old Trace McGrady, like young Trace McGrady, where he would just shoot over people.
Yep.
Because like Durant has all the physical tools, but he doesn't have the aggression that Trace McGrady has, where he just has the confidence to shoot over people. Like Durant still tries to get around people and still tries to like create space. T-Mac didn't give a fuck. He just, you know what I'm saying? Like he would just pull up with a dude right on him because he knew he was taller and can jump higher and had the long arms. And so he would just shoot over the top of you and there's nothing you could do.
Yep. Emoni Bates just has that constant, I guess. Not that Kevin Durant, I think he could score over people, but like, remember how in the playoffs, like early in the playoffs, when his last year with the Warriors in 2018-19, his teammates were imploring him to shoot more. Even his own teammates on Golden State were imploring him to shoot more and stuff. Kevin Durant is the most effortless scorer I've ever seen. The high motor to score, like the Tracy McGrady you're talking about, or the Kobe Bryant, Kevin Durant doesn't have that as much, but I definitely see it in Bates. But 100%. I want to thread the needle carefully here because who knows if Bates will be even as half as good as Kevin Durant. But
we're just saying in terms of what he is now.
In terms of what he is now, like I see a motor and a hunger within him to score the basketball. I do think he needs to work on his in-between game a little bit to be, because at least in this game, I didn't see it as much, but it seems like that's from people that I've read and stuff. It seems like that's a thing he needs to work on, is his in-between game. But he kind of showed flashes of it in Thursday's game that made you just go, oh my God, like this is like a legit 3-level scorer. But I just wanted to bring that up because I saw some aliens and the league is good. Man, the league is just going to be in good hands, which is going to start up pretty soon with everything starting, trade rumors, everything. It's a good time for basketball right now and a quick turnaround.
So actually the thing that I do want to bring up too, while we're talking about Emoni Bates and the thing we're talking about with Chet Holmgren, is how stacked the next maybe 2 to 3 drafts are. Like this draft is kind of weak and we've known that for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
But the star power and the kind of game changing superstar potential of the next 2 to 3 drafts are absolutely huge. Yep. So when we start talking about trade value and we start talking about sort of these draft picks that are coming up, it is going to be critically important to keep that in mind. So a team like the Thunder that is accumulating all of these draft picks is going to be in a really good spot moving forward in the next 2 to 3 years.
Especially if the NBA starts letting high schoolers get drafted again. I think 2022, everybody's kind of hoarding their picks because they don't know if that's going to be the year or not, but it seems like that might be the target year. So that's being held like a rare candy in a Pokemon game.
Right. But yeah, I totally agree with you and that they're absolute monsters and there's a lot of talent coming up and it's very exciting to see.
Scary.
So let's talk about the big news of the day: the San Antonio Spurs.
I wasn't sure if I wanted to laugh or I was like,
No, so big news of the day, obviously Chris Paul.
Yes.
Going to the Phoenix Suns.
Yep. So Chris Paul, like you said, going to the Phoenix Suns, along with Abdel Nader, who I actually think is on the upward trajectory and developing into a nice 3-and-D wing. He's been on that trajectory the last few years in Oklahoma City. The Suns are going to get those 2 players, and in return, the Thunder are going to get Ricky Rubio, Kelly Oubre, a.k.a. Tsunami Poppy, Ty Jerome, a Jalen LeCue, and a protected 2022 first-round pick that eventually becomes unprotected in the 2025 year. So
first, before we get into anything, obviously we're going to talk about Chris Paul and the Suns because that's the most important thing here. Yes. But I will say I do like Ty Jerome, I do like Jason LeCue, and I do like Kelly Oubre. And I think they're all solid prospects. that can be pluses for the Thunder moving forward.
I don't think the Thunder are going to be a bad team again this year. I
No.
actually like this team a lot, especially their identity is clearly going to be defense with this
With Shea.
With
my concern is with Shea and seeing if Shea can carry the load, because now he is truly by himself on offense.
Well, it depends. The Thunder have a war chest of assets now, so they might be angling to get up in the draft and maybe take another ball handler, maybe LaMelo Ball, maybe Killian Hayes, Tyrese Halliburton, although that'd be funny just basically seeing two copies of Shea Gilgeous-Alexander on the court at the same time. But yeah, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander will be by himself, but I think he's one of those players where he'll obviously need help. He can't carry the load by himself, but I think he's just such a smart and good player that I think he'll be able to at least develop. He won't be able to hinder his development.
Completely agree.
Where it gets really interesting is now with Dennis Schroder getting shipped. We're going to talk about him later, but we're getting Danny Green and the 28th pick along with the 25th pick this year. Just the Thunder have accumulated a war chest of assets. They flipped Russell Westbrook for a boatload of first-round picks from the Rockets. And then, remember, when Chris Paul signed that extension back in 2018, or that Supermax in 2018, and everyone was like, this contract's going to be untradeable. Here we are 2 years later, and Chris Paul was flipped for more stuff. Not just more stuff that can be moved. Rubio is expiring. Oubre is expiring. You can move those guys if contenders need players like that. And then, of course, you got Ty Jerome, who is a decent-looking prospect, Jalen LeCue, and we all know how infamous the Thunder's player development staff is with developing players, finding guys like Lou Dort, for example, undrafted. So it's a great trade for the Thunder still because they flipped Chris Paul's hefty contract. They were able to squeeze another great year out of Chris Paul to get value. And for the Suns, I'm a huge Suns stockholder. I don't know how much of a fan you've been of the Suns' young talent over the last few years, but me in particular, I'm a huge Devin Booker fan. This is perfect for Devin Booker. Getting Chris Paul in that organization, one, gives you credence through the rest of the league, signaling that you're ready to take the next step and start winning some games and maybe make a playoff run. You're also signaling that to not only DeAndre Ayton down the road, but Devin Booker right now, who is just going to start a huge contract, right? And so getting Chris Paul in there gives you a level of respectability, and quite frankly, he's the perfect point guard to put next to Booker. I want to go into the lineup stats, but what was your initial reaction at first blush watching this trade from the Suns' perspective?
So I love the trade. I'm not a huge fan of Devin Booker. I think he's talented. I think he's really good. I just want to see a little bit more on the defensive end of the court from him. But I think as a scorer, he's obviously an incredibly effortless scorer. I'm a huge DeAndre Ayton guy. So
Me too.
I love it. I love the motor. I love his defensive effort. He's become, I think, quietly one of the best defenders in the league.
He went from one of the worst as a rookie to his development as a rim protector was night and day this year. And I think he's become, I wouldn't say he's became good yet this year. I think the leap he made from bad to average was very impressive. And that can only mean that it's going to be more positive growth for him down the road. I was always a fan of his ability to switch at Arizona. He might not have been the rim protector in college, like say Anthony Davis or Joel Embiid when they were in college. But I always saw when Ayton would switch out on the perimeter, that guy can move his feet. And so I wasn't as worried about his defensive stuff as everybody else was. But Ayton's strides as a defender this year have just been really good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he is, to me at least, he's been elite in pick and roll. And again, it comes back to him being able to switch out and get back. It reminds me a lot of Hakeem, where if you watch old Hakeem Olajuwon, things of him in the pick and roll, he is getting out and being able to get back to his man extremely quickly. And it comes back to Ayton's foot speed, right? That we keep talking about.
Yeah.
The thing that I do think this trade does is it puts Ayton in the best spot to be the best version of himself. The pick and roll with Chris Paul and him, and the pick and roll with the pick and pop that he has with the shooting ability, the shooting touch that he has, can be dangerous.
Yeah, it's something especially if he makes the commitment to stretch out to 3 this season, if Ayton does.
Right, and it's something that I don't think they could necessarily run to perfection with Devin Booker, because Devin Booker is so talented as an ISO scorer that you don't want to put him in constant pick and rolls. But when you have someone like Chris Paul that can run that pick and roll, and then you can have Devin Booker off spotting up the corner, which is something that he hasn't been able to do since he was a rookie, because of the offensive load that he's had to carry, I think that it puts them in a really good spot.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too for Devin Booker specifically. I've always been a big Devin Booker fan. I think the label of him being an empty calories guy was always just misguided to me, because he had league average efficiency, always playing on bad teams, despite being the main focal point on offense. With Chris Paul, you not only get one, obviously, it's an upgrade over Ricky Rubio, who was an upgrade for the Suns last year just by nature of having an adult at the point guard position.
Right.
Having Chris Paul as a guy who can score at all 3 levels. He's one of the best mid-range shooters ever. He is a really good spot-up 3-point shooter, and he could shoot threes, albeit slowly, but out of the pick and roll, especially now at his age. He can also, the rim shot, the rim attempts at the rim, obviously that's been down the last few years just by byproduct of Chris Paul's age. But it gives Devin Booker, like you said, the opportunity to spot up for the first time since Kentucky in his rookie year, but also to be a secondary playmaker, because I think Devin Booker is actually a really good playmaker. He just can't be the guy that could run you have to run everything through him while also asking him to be an efficient 3-level scorer. Now Devin Booker can get scoring opportunities in different ways. He might be able to attack a closeout. He is a smart cutter when he's able to be off the ball. He can cut off the ball. He can move off screens. Maybe his 3-point percentage now starts to go up, and he starts looking more like the dead eye shooter that we all thought he would be coming out of Kentucky, because he's not taking difficult shots. This is just a clean fit everywhere. And the fact that the Suns did not have to give up Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, DeAndre Ayton, or Devin Booker to get Chris Paul, that to me is a no-brainer deal for the Suns. I want to give you some lineup data real quick. So the lineup of Ricky Rubio, Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, and DeAndre Ayton, the lineup that they kind of played with before the stoppage, and then the lineup they straight up went to that was most effective during the bubble, that lineup had a 20.5 net rating. They had an offensive rating of 121.9 points per 100, a defensive rating of 101.3 per 100. So not only could they score efficiently, they could also get stops. Now just take out Ricky Rubio and put in Chris Paul, who is a better shooter than Rubio, and all the other things we explained about, plus the fact Chris Paul is a first ballot Hall of Fame point guard. That brings leadership credibility. And what you were saying with Ayton, you wouldn't think Chris Paul would be able to help Ayton's development on defense. I think with how Chris Paul communicates, with how smart he is on the defensive end of the floor, how he sees the game, I imagine DeAndre Ayton, if he has the desire to get better like he always says he does, and I really do think he does, he's going to be in Chris Paul's lap all the time. He's going to follow him around the entire season and getting pointers from him. And Chris Paul, knowing the tricks of the trade and giving little tips to guys like Mikal Bridges, who is already a great defender. I love this Phoenix Suns team, man. And I might like them a little bit more than the Dallas Mavericks, given Porzingis' health situation.
Right. I totally agree with you there. My thing is, where does this bump them up to? Because to me, it bumps them up to maybe being like a 6th
That's the thing.
seed.
The Western Conference is a beast.
Yeah, to me, it bumps them up to maybe being a 6th seed. I could see Dallas falling out. I could see the Thunder falling out. I could see the Trailblazers, I think, are going to take a step back up if they're healthy. I think the Suns are right.
That's the thing. You look down this list, you look down the standings just in last year, just from this past season, you're hard pressed to take a team out. The candidates that would drop out to me would be the Thunder, and I would put the Blazers on that list before I would put the Mavericks, just because I think the world of Luka Doncic. And
so do I. But I think that if Kristaps is going to miss the first half of the season and then comes back and has to rehab and do whatever, I don't know if they can keep pace.
Right.
I don't know if Luka by himself can keep pace. And remember, too, the Warriors are going to come back.
And the Warriors are going to come back too, and that is also, it's a tough proposition for sure. But I guess I guess I would go back to my original state. I would take the Suns at least over the Mavericks. I would take them over the Blazers. I just got to see what they look like fully healthy first. Can Zach Collins not get hurt again for most of the year? Can Nurkic kind of pick up his play that he showed in the bubble? Dame Lillard's going to be Dame Lillard. I'm not worried about CJ McCollum, but my whole thing is this Suns team is so well constructed, and keep in mind, Abdel Nader is not a throw-in. I really do think he could get some minutes with this team, but with how the Suns are constructed now, I really do think they're a legitimate playoff team. How high they'll get up in the standings, we'll see. We also can't forget, because we're going to be talking about them in a little bit, the Houston Rockets also have a huge chance of falling out as well, especially if Harden and Westbrook are both gone before the season starts. So I still kind of like the Suns probably in that 6 to 8 seed range, to be honest.
Well, see, this is where it gets interesting, because say the top 3 seeds stay the same, right? Say it's Lakers, Clippers, Nuggets, right? Which I think they are a class above the other Western Conference teams, right?
Yes.
So if the Suns pull the Lakers and the Nuggets, I think that the Lakers and the Nuggets win, just because I think Ayton and Bridges are the 2 major factors there in terms of being able to keep pace with the bigs and being able to contain Anthony Davis or Jokic. I think those are the big key factors there, because obviously, as great as Booker is, as great as Chris Paul is, there's a lot of great wing defenders on both of those teams and both of those rosters.
Right.
But if they pull the Clippers lack of bigs and skilled bigs does concern me.
Yeah, especially if they lose Montrezl Harrell this summer too, who was already getting killed by Jokic in the playoffs.
Right, and Anthony Davis and LeBron in those regular season games. But even then, if the Suns pulled the Clippers, I could see them beating the Clippers pretty handily too.
I don't know if I'd say pretty handily, but I could see a world in which a Chris Paul led Phoenix Suns team does beat the Clippers.
Well, you got to think of how smart Chris Paul is. Chris Paul is, right? Being able to attack a defense at their weak point, and when you have the Clippers, who have a huge gaping hole in the middle, Ivica Zubac is not stopping DeAndre Ayton or Devin Booker going to the basket.
No, they are not. And we saw in the bubble when the Suns played the Clippers, the Suns threw Kawhi and Paul George at Devin Booker, and he still roasted them. So Devin Booker has the ability to roast even the best perimeter defenders the league has to offer.
Right, and then now again, that's without an elite playmaker like Chris Paul.
Yeah,
so and that's with the entire defense knowing Devin Booker has to have the ball. So now when you play it where you don't know Devin Booker can hit you in, again, like
any spot on the floor,
any spot on the floor without needing the ball, it makes that job 10 times harder. Plus, again, that pick and roll with all the Nuggets did to beat the Clippers was run pick and roll.
Yeah, they ran pick and roll. They basically did the Jokic Murray. I tried to combine their names together. The Jokic Murray 2-man game, whether it was dribble handoffs or pick and roll, they just ran that to death on the Clippers.
And all it was either Zubac or Harrell getting lost defensively.
Yeah,
and it made the game so easy.
And when you think about the spacing with Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges, although his shot is still kind of wonky, he's starting to come around, especially on corner 3-pointers.
And they're both fantastic cutters.
And exactly. Then you could for the starting 5 at least, you could definitely see how this is going to work out, and you could definitely see what Monty Williams is going to draw up, because I think Monty Williams is a good coach. Also, we can't forget about that part. Kind of gotten discredited. Yeah, exactly. Chris Paul always talks about how he'd get excited for plays that Monty drew up when he was with the now back then New Orleans Hornets. And so now that they're back together again, you could just imagine the stuff Chris Paul is thinking about right now in terms of how the roster is going to look off in an offensive set. So
yeah, very, very excited. But shout out to Sam Presti. Sam Presti now has a war chest.
I'm going to be like, I was always into team building, but when the Sixers went through the process, team building was about the only thing I can get into. Because, I literally have a Rights to Ricky Sanchez shirt, shout out to that podcast, that has all of the players that have been through the process, all the undrafteds, the 10-day contracts we've signed, et cetera, et cetera. Team building was about the only thing that I could get into at that point. But I want to list you, before we move on, the war chest of assets Presti has. 2020, he has the Nuggets first round pick and the Lakers first round pick. Well, the Lakers can't trade it because they already traded a bunch of their picks. So they're going to have to pick a player, then trade that player on draft night. But they have, for all intents and purposes, they have the Lakers first round pick. 2021, they have their own first round pick. They have the Heat first round pick, and they have a Houston pick swap. That might be really good depending on what happens to Westbrook and Harden. 2022, own first, Clippers first, Suns first. 2023, own first, Clippers pick swap, Heat first. 2024, own first, Clippers first, Houston first. 2026, their own first round pick, Clippers first round pick, Houston Rockets first round pick. The OKC owns like 20% of the first round picks that are coming up in the next 5 years. And I am very excited to see what Sam Presti is going to do with it.
Right. And again, like we said, it does really bode well for them moving forward, given how stacked these next 3 drafts are going to be. The thing that I do want to point out is draft picks don't always mean anything. I mean, we had the Celtics and, the Nets kind of having the Nets balls for a long time and having all of those draft picks, right?
And it wasn't as good as we thought it could be.
Well, so I'm looking at it now. So when you look at it, I think they have good picks, right? So Marcus Smart, Terry Rozier, Jaylen Brown, obviously, Jason Tatum. That's about it. When you look at these, looks like 15 or 16 draft picks over the course of 6 years, and that's not a ton.
It's not a ton, but at the end of the day, it is about hitting the ones that count, right?
Right. But I think the problem that you had in Boston and the problem that you had, with all those picks was Danny Ainge never really pulled the trigger on maximizing those draft picks. I think there was a lot of cold feet on making big trades or making sort of big swings with these picks. I think they valued them a little too much.
That also depends on, because with Anthony Davis is the most prominent one everybody was coming up with. Didn't sound like Anthony Davis wanted to come to Boston.
No.
Even though you could just pull the trigger anyway and get him in your system for a year and see how it goes. But then you're, ass out of assets, right? And then Jimmy Butler, that was another big one. I definitely
you got to think about it, right? So if you trade for Anthony Davis, which was the big kind of thing, right?
Mm.
You give up, obviously you wouldn't give up Tatum, but you'd give up maybe Jaylen Brown, and then these 4 picks from last year: Romeo Langford, Matisse Thybulle, which they did trade to Philadelphia, Grant Williams, Tremont Waters, Robert Williams. Those aren't great picks. I mean, I like Thybulle, but I mean, they traded him anyway. But I mean, what are you really getting? And to me, it was just a waste of the amount of assets that you had. If they're just sitting there and it's like playing the lottery, right? Right, do I want to play the lottery and play these draft picks that I hope turn out right, or do I want to trade them for established thing that I know what I'm getting, right?
Right.
So I mean, it's a philosophical thing. It's how much you trust your
scouting department, how much you trust your front office to make smart decisions if trades of value come up. I also think
I think they ran out of time, personally.
Yeah, and also to be fair, I do want to point out real quickly, I do think, because I think about this a lot with my team and how they've absolutely took their assets and lit it to asunder. It is still at the end of the day about hitting the ones that hit, right? So Jason Tatum, I have him right now as a tier 1.5 franchise player on the cusp of being a tier 1 franchise player. So that pick obviously hit. I think Jaylen Brown, while his playmaking and his off-ball defense still needs to improve, he's still one of the best 3-and-D wings in the NBA, and wing versatility in the NBA is never a bad thing to have. So they did hit on some pieces, but yes, they could have made the most out of it. And it'll be interesting to see what Sam Presti now does, because he's loaded. And not only that, they have Steven Adams expiring contract they can get off of, and they have a bunch of more expirings they can flip into even more picks. So it'll be fun to see what happens.
Right. Yeah, totally agree with that. And so like this is another thing too. Again, I don't want to be a Laker fanboy, but the thing is that when you look at what the Lakers did,
no, be a Laker fanboy.
When you think about when you look at what the Lakers did, the last 4 drafts, they haven't had nearly the draft capital that the Celtics or any of the other kind of bigger teams that we talk about having draft capital have. But I mean, they ended up with Julius Randle, D'Angelo Russell, Larry Nance Jr., Brandon Ingram, Ivica Zubac, Lonzo Ball, Josh Hart, Kyle Kuzma. And these are a lot of these were some, I mean, obviously with Russell, Ingram, and Ball, those are, second overall picks. But the thing was that the real value, I mean, Jordan Clarkson even too. The thing is, when you look at the later picks, those are all guys that are starting or solid rotation guys in the league still that they got value for.
Yep.
And that's
Larry Nance Jr. even.
Yeah, I mean, that to me, that's a huge win for the organization, and that's a huge thing for your scouting department. That's a way that you use draft picks, right?
And
like,
it led up to you guys getting Anthony Davis. Granted, you guys also had the 4th pick or the Pelicans winning the lottery had a lot to do with it also. Right. But the Lakers had built up hit on enough picks and had some picks of their own, and they went all in, and look where they're at now. So speaking of the Lakers, what's your take on Dennis Schroder going to the Lakers? I have some thoughts myself, but I know you are. I'm pretty sure you're pretty. I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, but I'm pretty sure you're probably excited about this.
I am excited. So to me, I wrote this big thing, and I wrote a long thing on. I wrote this huge thing to explain to people because everyone kept messaging me like, well, how do you feel about this? So I just wrote this big thing and I posted it on social media. And so the first line is, Dennis Schroder is not a Danny Green replacement. He's a Rondo replacement. He's an upgrade in some ways.
100%.
And a downgrade in others. There's just some general concerns. My TLDR is Schroder and Rondo are similar types of players, but Schroder is 7 years younger. And trading Danny Green and letting Rondo go in free agency allows the Lakers to save some money and possibly go after players like Serge Ibaka, Danilo Gallinari, or help retain KCP.
Also, there's some stuff with Dennis Schroder just about how much he'll pick up the pace. He was he's also a part of the infamous OKC lineup that was one of the clutchest lineups in NBA history with Chris Paul, SGA, Schroder, Gallinari, and Steven Adams, and Schroder played a big part of that. I think he's an immediate upgrade over Rondo for the regular season. Now, whether there's a playoff Dennis Schroder versus playoff Rondo, who knows?
That's the question, right? That's the big question.
That's the big question. Schroder, the extent of Schroder's big games were getting LeBron in the Eastern Conference Finals. That's about it. And even then, his role was getting phased out. He wanted out. So this is obviously an upgrade, I think, for the regular season. But in the playoffs, we'll see. Will his shooting be a concern for the Lakers? Also, he hasn't had the best reputation.
No, last year was an outlier. He shot
38. He shot 38% from 3 last year. Is that sustainable?
His catch and shoot 3-point percentage last year was in the 87th percentile.
Yeah.
So here's the last one, here's the last couple years of him, right? So starting in 2013 and going up, his catch and shoot 3-point percentile, right? 22%, 33%, 3%, 12%, 1%, 6%, and then 87% last year.
Is that a statistical outlier?
That's it could be. I mean, there's two factors, right? One was he was pretty inconsistent minutes wise over the course of this year. He was 33rd percentile in terms of minute consistency over game to game. So a little less playing time. The thing was that he had really good box plus minus this year. Again, like you're talking about in the lineups that he was in, they had some record-setting performances. The thing with him is that before this year, a lot of his shots were coming off the dribble, where this is the first year where he really did shoot, catch and shoot.
A big part of his shot diet
right.
changed to
so
catch.
He's shooting 3.9% or 3.9 catch and shoot threes to every one pull up.
Yep.
So to me, that's a huge kind of
indicator that it might be somewhat real. Like there might be something.
And it's also a big indicator of the effect of Chris Paul, like having an elite playmaker on the floor with you at all times, which bodes well for Schroder now being with LeBron James.
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, the Lakers have somebody who might be the greatest ever at doing that.
Right. So like to me, it's not a huge drop off to say like, well, it's only Chris Paul. Okay, well, we have LeBron. Like it's not a big deal. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not a huge thing. The concern with me is the pick and roll scoring is pretty bad, which Rondo ran a ton of pick and roll with Anthony Davis, and that was kind of a bread and butter when LeBron wasn't in the game.
Yep.
So
that's going to be the big question: is a Schroder Anthony Davis centric lineup when LeBron's on the bench? Is that going to be as effective as having Rondo there, who might not be as aggressive as a scorer or a 3-point, or he might not shoot, or Rondo shot like 1,000% from three in the playoffs? But is Schroder as good of a playmaker? Is he a more effective scorer at the rim? Who knows? Who knows how that'll shake out?
So the thing that gives me some room to be a little less concerned about it is that he is going to be sharing minutes with on the floor with Caruso most likely. So it's not like he is the only playmaker and ball handler on the floor at all times.
No. Yeah.
And so if you have Caruso there to help share the load, and then if he's not on the floor, LeBron is with him as well. It gives we always have two on the floor at the same time, so there's some assistance there. I don't believe in Schroder as a primary ball handler like we did with Rondo, but I do think that as long as we're appropriately matching him with another person that can help, I think we'll be fine. But I mean, do think to me the biggest upgrade here is defensively.
Yeah.
Because Rondo could not slide his feet anymore and stay in front of anything.
Nope. He could not. And even in the playoffs, like there were times where you saw flashes of old Rondo, especially when the Lakers would put together these quarters against Miami where they're just flying all over the place. And even Rondo was, doing his patent play the passing lanes and being a pest on that end. Schroder is he's 7 years younger. He's at this point just a better defender just by default.
But he does play similarly to Rondo. I don't think he's as smart as Rondo, but he has that long wingspan and those big hands, and he is able to go ahead and play passing lanes in almost the same way. Again, the only reason he's not as good as it is because of he's not the basketball savant that Rondo is, right? But again, when you're on the floor with a LeBron James who can help you see those tendencies and help you figure it out, I think he'll be fine.
And then, like you said, the Lakers could also they can retool their roster a little bit. I mean, Avery Bradley declined his player option, so he might not be back, but the Lakers can also look at Serge Ibaka, or remember we were talking about before, Danilo Gallinari said he'd be willing to take less money to play for a contender this year. Jeremy Grant declined his player option, and so he's going to be a free agent this summer. So
the early favorite for the Lakers to sign, I would assume just due to cost and defensive capability, is Wesley Matthews.
That Wesley Matthews was also the other name that I saw brought up, who is also, I think, a better player than Avery Bradley.
At this point in
quite
their career,
frankly,
yeah.
At this point in their careers. So that's another one is Wesley Matthews could take less money to sign with the Lakers. The Lakers are, for somehow, some way, the Lakers are still in a prime position to one. Obviously, they're going to keep LeBron and Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis is just probably going to sign a 1-and-1, and so he can get that 10-year eligibility for a supermax.
Yeah.
And then the Lakers can still retool with better players. It's kind of wild in the position that they are in right now. You're probably ecstatic.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to what we were talking about last week with the salary cap the way it is, that a lot of teams don't have the room. So the contenders that are able to give out these smaller contracts, these small 1-year deals, or
Exceptions,
come get a ring. The come get a ring deal is
Yep.
is going to be strong.
Yeah, for sure. So enough musing about your team. It's time to go to my team because I have some thoughts.
with the real spice.
With the real spice. So,
topic of the show.
James Harden, superstar, scorer extraordinaire, perennial MVP candidate for the Houston Rockets, has been wanting out. He has made his destinations clear. It's either Brooklyn or Philadelphia. Now, Houston has said that they are committed to keeping Westbrook and Harden together, but I think I think that's broke boy Tillman Fertitta leaking out stuff to try and, salvage and hopefully keep them. Although once those two start leaking stuff to Shams and Woj, like it's done. So there's two destinations Harden wants to go to. We'll get to Westbrook later, but Harden is the better player and is a tier 1 franchise player. So we're going to talk about him first. One, which destination do you like
for Harden?
For Harden, Brooklyn or Philadelphia? And once you answer that, I want to get into trade packages because you had some takes that I have been sitting on that I was sitting on pre-show that I had to think about, and I have some thoughts on that.
So I think both are interesting. I think obviously the interesting thing is if he goes to Brooklyn, if they can make it work, right? If Steve Nash can imbue some Steve Nash-ness into Kyrie, it's deadly. And if Harden turns into Thunder James Harden, where he's playing off ball, he has the floaters, he's driving to the basket, that's terrifying.
And Kevin Durant, you can put Kevin Durant anywhere. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter with Kevin Durant. Even I don't know how you feel about his injury. I know it's an Achilles. It's a concern for sure, but I think Kevin Durant's game is just going to age beautifully. So I'm not too concerned about it. I guess maybe naively.
Kevin Durant can set shot over most players. Okay.
Yeah.
He doesn't need to jump or do anything. But he doesn't concern me. Again, so for me, if they can make it work, and it's a big if because I don't know, like Harden can't dribble and play iso ball. He can't play Harden ball, Morey ball in Brooklyn with Kyrie and Durant. It won't work. But if they can make it work, and we know that Harden has this in his game because we saw it early in his career.
And he's a genius level passer too.
Right. So if we can see a little bit of that and it works, then obviously I think Brooklyn is the place for him to go. The easier plug and play move is to just put him in Philadelphia, where he can continue to play what he wants to do what he wants to do. He's back with Daryl Morey. He's, Doc Rivers is going to let him do his thing, and then Embiid can, Embiid's an upgrade obviously to Clint Capella and Dwight Howard from what when he played with Dwight Howard,
to say the least.
Right. So it'll work perfectly fine. They can just rebuild the current Houston Rockets in Philadelphia with hopefully better contracts and hopefully move some pieces around. But obviously Ben would have to go in that trade package, but I don't know. to me, the easier way is Philadelphia, and the more enticing but risky way is to go to the Nets.
Okay,
At least in my mind.
So okay, I agree with most of what you're saying. If Harden did go to Philadelphia, I don't think it would be exactly like how the Houston Rockets were ran. I do think James Harden would go back to running a bit more pick and roll and just not unlocking, but repolishing or reintroducing himself to the other parts of his game. Like he's a great pick. The last time James Harden's amount of possessions, the last time James Harden ran a good chunk of his possessions as a pick and roll ball handler was 2016, 2017, where he ran pick and roll 40% of the time. And he was a 90th percentile pick and roll ball handler. And obviously, the last few years, the frequency has dropped lower and lower and lower as the Rockets have evolved into just ISO ball. And Harden, the step back three is one of the greatest shots invented in the sports history. So Morey went all in more and more on that every year. Harden was still in the 80th percentile with as little pick and roll as the Rockets ended up running towards the end of this era. So I think, one, it's a seamless fit. The Sixers cannot get Harden without trading one of Simmons or Embiid. So Ben Simmons I'm going to have to grip with the fact that Ben Simmons is going to go, and I'm going to lose a long-standing bet that I have with my friends, some of whom are listening to this podcast right now. And I'm going to have to accept that. But I'm very intrigued, obviously, with the Harden and Embiid duo, because obviously it's a cleaner fit, but I want to see, I've seen some stuff in hemming and hawing. I'm a Ben Simmons enthusiast, but there are Ben Simmons enthusiasts who would say Ben is the better player than Embiid, and I am not with that at all. If you're talking about long-term, because of health, I could understand taking Ben Simmons over Embiid, but having Harden and Embiid and unlocking Embiid as a role man is just something the Sixers haven't done yet. And I know over the years, Embiid has been vertically challenged. He's been more ground bound, but I also think he hasn't had the opportunity to be a role man or run pick and roll frequently. The Sixers were consistently, under Brett Brown's era, one of the least frequent pick and roll teams in the NBA. 2016-17, they ran 12% of their possessions were pick and roll. That's 29th. 2017-18, 30th. 2018-19, 29th. 2019-20, 29th. And a lot of that was personnel because Embiid's best point guard, not named Ben Simmons, who he really didn't run pick and roll with anyway, was Sergio Rodriguez in 2016-17. And that was ironically Embiid's best stats he posted as a role man. So having a dynamic guard like James Harden is going to make Embiid so much more better. He can actually throw an entry pass. Embiid can pop out for easier threes. There should be more spacing. Obviously, having Harden coming downhill off of a screen is scary as hell, especially when you got a 280-pound guy rolling to the rim. I'm excited about this. And it sucks that we might have to give away Ben Simmons, but obviously, as big of a Ben enthusiast I have him as a tier 1.5 franchise player. It's a no-brainer. If the Sixers have to give up Ben Simmons to get James Harden, you have to do it. You can argue, okay, a Harden and Embiid duo, the window is shorter, but the Sixers never had a title window, let alone a playoff window after this season to begin with, especially after how we saw how the season ended this past season a couple of months ago. So we would have not just a playoff window, a title window would be open for the first time in forever. If the Sixers could somehow finesse Tillman Fertitta, as Kendrick Perkins likes to call him, if they can somehow finesse getting Harden out of Houston without giving Ben and Joe up, I have no problems. Figure out a way to do that, but it's pretty impossible. You have to give Ben one of those two up, and I think Ben Simmons is the odd guy out. And I think a Harden and Embiid duo is a scary proposition for the rest of the East.
I completely agree with that. I think we saw with the Lakers where not just the skill and the 3-point shooting, but it's the size and the bully ball still works as long as those big guys are athletic and have the skill to shoot threes and to pull it out. And like, it's the size with the skill, right? It's not just the skill.
Exactly.
And so when you have someone like Embiid and even Tobias Harris.
And that's the other thing too. Tobias Harris, he could easily make up 50% of that contract in terms of value just by getting shots off of Harden and Embiid's offense.
So again, like when you have guys like that, it's essentially what the Lakers did. You just play bully ball, where you have Harden run point like LeBron did. Obviously, Harden isn't the bully that LeBron is, but he has.
He's big. He has the strength and can move people around. Yeah,
and he has the game like LeBron, where he's just driving to the basket and he's asserting his will offensively. And so when you have that ability, you can just beat up on teams and unlock Embiid in a way that you've never had before. Where you're just playing down low and you're giving the ball to him on the block and letting him go. The problem you couldn't do that with before was because then Ben Simmons doesn't create any kind of spacing for and not ability for you to be able to do that. And so now you have that ability with Harden, you have that ability to do that. And so again, it's an exciting proposition. The thing is, again, is whether or not, well, like to me, the Nets thing is just more interesting because they are more dynamic and it does give them a lot more flexibility to move. But I can see the appeal for Harden to want to go there or go to the Nets and be not just one of the stars, but the star still.
Before we get to the trade packages, because I wanted to ask you to expand on your flexibility thing, because I might have a few disagreements there on that. Like you were saying, the Joel Embiid, James Harden fit offensively is a cleaner fit. Now, I will always defend that the fit of Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid was never the problem in Philadelphia. It was the roster around it. The offensive fit wasn't perfect, but it was fine. And I think nobody talks about how great of a fit they are defensively together.
They're an awesome defensive unit.
Everybody wants to talk about how we got to look at the game beyond offense and there's another half of the court or whatever. Everybody conveniently forgets that Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons are an amazing fit together defensively. But there is something to be said about having your two best players be involved in plays more often. And it was more so in the first season of the Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons era, where they were involved in a lot of plays together because they had the shooting and spacing around him, but they never had the ball handlers. The best point guard was Sergio Rodriguez. Now the Sixers are to a point where they've lit a tire fire to their assets so badly that unfortunately they might have to give up. They're going to have to give up Ben Simmons to get somebody like a James Harden when they could have maybe had all three if they had just played their assets even made 2 or 3 decisions differently, which is also disappointing. But I want to get back to your trade package thing. So I want you to expand on what you mean by more flexibility with the Nets package. I'm going to give you the floor because I have some thoughts on that.
So, all right, let me bring up the Nets salary cap table here. All right. So, look, I think we're in agreement that to trade for Harden, the Philadelphia would have to give up Ben Simmons, maybe some draft picks, and some filler.
Yes.
Right? Like we're in agreement that is the package, right?
Yes.
So, and for me, at least the way that I was seeing it, the Nets would have to give up like Karis LeVert, Spencer DeWitt, Jared Allen,
Dinwiddie.
Yeah, Spencer Dinwiddie. I was calling him DeWitt. So Karis LeVert.
Too many I's in the name.
Right. So it's Karis LeVert, DeWitt, or Dinwiddie, Jared Allen, and then maybe some draft picks.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe a filler or two. But those are your 3 big young pieces, and then like picks to get a James Harden. Like you have to clear the farm.
Yes.
So to me, it comes down to, if you're the Rockets, do you want to build around Ben Simmons right? Is Ben Simmons your guy, and you want to build around the future of Ben Simmons with whatever draft picks you can get, and then however you can refuel your draft capital, right? Or do you want to take all these three young, talented Nets guys? Because I think I love LeVert.
I love LeVert too. I did a whole video on him. Loved him since Michigan.
I love LeVert. I think Jared Allen has a lot of potential, and I think Spencer Dinwiddie has, I think he is a top tier kind of starting point guard. I don't think he's one of the best, but I think he is in that top echelon of you would trust him to run your team for a long period of time. I think he is a long-standing starting point guard for your team. Right.
I wouldn't say Dinwiddie's a starting point guard. I definitely think he's one of the better guards in the league. I just think he is not a good enough 3-point shooter to take as many shots as he does off the dribble. And I also think that he averaged 7 assists, but I think his main call is scoring. And I just don't think he's that efficient of a player to be a starting point guard. He's definitely a good bench player. I love Caris LeVert. My problem with Caris LeVert is going to be always injury. The health. Health is always going to be a concern with me. Jared Allen, I think, is going to be a really good center for a long time, starting center.
Right. So getting back to the thing, again, it goes back to, do you want to build around Ben Simmons with whatever assets you can pull together? Because again, you're not going to be able to pull much. You're going to get, if you're getting Ben Simmons, you're only going to get maybe 1, maybe 2 draft picks, if that, from the Sixers, right? You're not going to get a lot of draft capital or a lot of assets besides Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons is the key package there. Where with the Nets, you're going to get Caris LeVert, Spencer Dinwiddie, and Jared Allen, and then maybe a few more draft picks than you would get from Philadelphia, at least in my mind of what it would take. So to me, when you have those 3 options, you have an option of, do I want to build around Caris LeVert and Jared Allen as a core? Do I want to trade DeWiddle? Do I want to trade all 3 of them for more draft capital to get back some of these assets that I lost in the Chris Paul and Westbrook and all the other major trades they've made in the last 4 years to try to make this work? And so it goes back to, do you want to start from scratch, or do I want to have a piece that I'm building around with not a lot to use? You know what I'm saying? It's the flexibility of saying, okay, I have these 3 pieces that I can get rid of or trade or whatever. If I trade for Ben Simmons, I'm building around Ben Simmons. This is my plan now. This is what I'm doing.
I guess I question the level of flexibility that you have in your trade package, because I think Caris LeVert at max is going to be the 3rd best player on a championship team if he reaches his ceiling. The 2nd best, possibly. Also, the Sixers have their 1st-round picks back starting next year in 2021, and we still have early 2nd-round picks from the Knicks and the Hawks. And so my buddy Ty Windish over at Blue Wire, he proposed a trade on. It is honestly one of the more realistic Sixer trades that I like. So the trade would be James Harden, and the Sixers would get James Harden and Robert Covington, and the Rockets in return would get Al Horford, Ben Simmons, New York's 2nd-round pick, which I think is the 34th pick in this year's draft. They would also get the Knicks 2021 2nd-round pick, which looks to be another high 2nd rounder. They would get our Oklahoma City pick this year, because we got Oklahoma City's it fell out of the top 20, so we get their pick. And then a 2023 round 2 pick and our 1st-round pick in 2022. I think that offer blows the Nets offer out of the water. And when you're talking about flexibility, I don't want to be all like, well, Ben Simmons is the matrix, but Ben Simmons is kind of the definition of flexibility to me, because he doesn't have a position. He's this uber versatile player, and you can build any type of team as long as you build it around him. And so that's why I think Ben Simmons and Horford, a deal based around that, would get it done. The last year on Al Horford's deal is partially guaranteed, so it's basically an expiring contract. So it'd be easier to move down the road. And I don't know. And I also look at it from a Rockets perspective. If you're looking at the Nets trade package that you proposed versus this one, I don't know, one, as an owner that's allegedly broke like Tillman Fertitta is, I don't know how you could sell him on the idea of trying to make money by putting out a B team Brooklyn Nets roster on the court that's not going to make the playoffs. You could probably move those guys down the road, but then you're basically going in full rebuild mode. And
that's what I'm saying.
And I think if you're going to go with a rebuild or a soft rebuild to start over, Ben Simmons is a guy I would absolutely build my team around. I think Ben Simmons is a fantastic player. I have him as a top 15 player right now, in the tier 1.5, of course, which I will be doing a video on soon. Kind of like a fighter game character tier list. I'm going to do a style of that for NBA players.
I love stuff like that. I've made one before. We should make our own and discuss them on the podcast.
Oh yeah, definitely. That is definitely another episode that we can do. But I think Ben Simmons is the type of player, if you're the Rockets and it's obviously insane to trade an all-time offensive weapon like James Harden. But if you're going to do it, you have to start around somebody like Ben Simmons, who is the definition of flexibility. You could put all kinds of players around him. Now, I wouldn't recommend putting 50,000 power forwards around him who can't shoot and like the same spots on the court as Ben Simmons. But having Al Horford in this trade with Simmons gives them the center that is a perfect fit, can stretch the floor, can play make. Al Horford is still a good player, declining player, but the role he had in Philadelphia did play some part in his poor play, on top of the fact that he's older. But if you build a package around that with picks down the road, and if you keep Eric Gordon, if you keep Daniel House, if you basically just, depending on what you get for Westbrook too, the Rockets kind of have a roster that you could put around Ben Simmons. I mean, granted, PJ Tucker is still there. I know he's mad because he feels like his contract is undervaluing him, which fair. PJ Tucker is 6'5" and is constantly guarding like 280-pound centers and is getting paid like $8 million a year.
Beat up every game. I feel so bad.
I feel so bad for him. He's like 35 years old too, and is somehow one of the most durable players in the league. Like, the Rockets already have like a set piece, or not a set roster, but they have pieces there that they could fit around Ben and to make some moves. Ben, to me, is the player that's appealing and makes him, because he's flexible in his versatility. That to me alone makes him more flexible than, I guess, a Nets package.
Right. So here's my case. And again, I totally agree with you that Ben is the ideal player and the player that you want to start your franchise around. So if you're the Rockets and you're trading for Ben Simmons, to me, nothing changes from the Harden stuff of like the clock is ticking now. Right. And you're basically in the same scenario where you trade for Ben Simmons, clock's ticking, and you have a ton of bad contracts and very little draft capital. So you have very little, you have bad contracts, you have very little draft capital, and like, okay, you need to turn around this roster quickly to make it competitive. Where now, if you trade for LeVert, like, to me, if you keep your roster and you add LeVert, DeWitty, and Jared Allen, I don't think that's a bad roster. I think you can then shift PJ Tucker back to the 4. I think you still have Eric Gordon. I think you still play that out and be relatively competitive. And obviously, you're not going to be the superstar team that you were before competing for championships, but you're going to be pretty flexible. And I'm not talking about them giving up second round picks like you're talking about with the Sixers. I'm talking about giving up first round picks and like really going all in on this, which I think the Nets would do at this point with Durant and Kyrie and adding Harden. They would go all in and really try to make this work. So the
question would be, would those first round picks even be valuable? Because a Nets team of KD, Kyrie, and Harden makes it high first rounders. And it's the same case with the Sixers too, but I just wonder how valuable that is if you're talking about the Nets versus the Sixers.
Well, then that's what I'm talking with LeVert and DeWitty and Jared Allen. The clock isn't ticking as fast, and so you have more room, and you don't have to worry about Ben Simmons leaving or potentially becoming disgruntled with your lack of flexibility over time. It gives you time to get out of those bad contracts, gives you time to recoup some of your draft capital, and then again start fresh with younger talent. rather than
Right.
starting. Like if you're given a piece right away, you're stuck in the same position you were before. You're stuck with no draft capital and bad contract around Ben Simmons. How do you retool this roster? And then you're back into wheeling and dealing and doing all this stuff to try to make it work. But now you're even you're in a worse starting spot than you were when you had Harden.
Right.
So
okay, so
to me, it's just a thing of take a couple years break with a decently competitive team with Karis LeVert and Jared Allen as like kind of your key pieces, and deciding whether or not you want to play around them or build around them. It gives you more flexibility, more time to then decide, okay, these are the guys. Okay, maybe we move them. Cool. Let's get more draft capital. Okay, great. Let's get out of these bad contracts. Let's let these go, and then kind of move away from it and start fresh. To me, that's your decision if you're the Rockets.
Right. That's okay. I see what you're saying. I just wonder if Tillman Fertitta is going to go that route because he has a lot of money to make up, allegedly. And
right. Well, because he just spent a ton of money the last 3 years for absolutely no reason.
for no reason. Leslie Alexander kind of sold that team at the right time. But I don't know if you've seen on NBA Twitter, there's a Twitter account, Vin Fosh NBA. He has been getting some headway recently because he predicted Daryl Morey he had sourced reporting allegedly saying Daryl Morey to the Sixers. He was one of the first who said that, although I honestly think that was just connecting the dots. But he also said Chris Paul is going to Phoenix a long time ago. You know how it is every summer. There's some guy on Reddit or somebody like that who is somehow right.
They pop
with
up.
Things like that. Here's what he said. And now I'm totally flip-flopping and saying that I absolutely will believe this, even though I said a few days ago, I'm not going to believe anything this guy tweets. There's growing sentiment in the Philadelphia 76ers front office that James Harden can be acquired without giving up Joel Embiid or Ben Simmons. Likely pieces would be Al Horford, Matisse Thybulle, Shake Milton, Zaire Smith, and multiple draft picks. That is not going to happen, but he has predicted 2 moves already, and I am sticking with that. We are not giving up Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid.
Then that goes back to my argument that my Nets play is actually the better play.
No, it's not. No, it is. I'm just kidding.
If that's the case, if they're not giving up Ben Simmons and it's just expiring contracts, then there's no reason to not take the Nets deal. Where
Matisse Thybulle is better than Karis LeVert. You heard it here first.
I like Matisse Thybulle. I really do. I think he's a great defensive guard.
Great video blogger too.
But yeah, like to me, again, it comes back to like money aside and money aside and all that stuff. To me, it's just a smarter thing to take it slow, because obviously, even if you are the Rockets and you get Ben Simmons, you're not challenging for the Western title.
No, you're not.
So why put yourself on the clock, and why put yourself potentially deeper into a hole trying to make this work?
Okay, so I have a question for you.
You wait it out, right? You save some money and you wait it out.
So I have a question then for you before I want to talk about Westbrook, of course, but I wonder if Ben Simmons did go to the Rockets, does the clock actually start? Because I feel like, just looking back on it in retrospect, and I've always had this feeling in the pit of my stomach that when Brian Colangelo started, trading away our young pieces like Robert Covington, Dario Saric, et cetera, it felt like we were moving the timeline too fast on 2 players who were at the time 22 and 24 and expecting them to win now. You don't think Ben Simmons is kind of thinking to himself, or the Rockets are looking at this like, okay, let's get him under us? If you're the new coach, Steven Silas, John Lucas, those guys on the coaching staff, that you're looking at Ben Simmons as somebody who is only 24, can still develop, but understand that he is just not ready to be the best guy on a championship team right now. Do you think Ben Simmons, because the expectation the last few years has been championship, that he would actually be disgruntled if he went to Houston and had a team built around him? I haven't bought much into the Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons. There's a feud between them. I do think both of them would have maybe a epiphany if they started playing on their own teams. Like, oh wow, like this is nice. Like I loved playing with Joel or I loved playing with Ben, but there's more spacing. Or Ben Simmons is like, I can spray the ball to a bunch of 3-point shooters and I can get to the rim at will with all this spacing. I do think there's some I'm just asking because part of me still wonders if Ben Simmons feels like he's a smart player. I just wonder if he realistically feels that it's a championship or bust mentality for him if he does get traded to Houston.
So I think that in my mind, players like him, players that's as talented as Ben Simmons and
who want to be as great as him, or
right, with as much
much
accolades as he has been getting, especially early in his career, and how much people talk about him being a superstar early in his career. I think you always have that mentality of like my clock is ticking.
Okay, I was just checking. The other half of the Houston's
the other turbine of this rocket.
Yeah. All right, then we'll go with that. So Russell Westbrook. There were some rumblings. Kevin O'Connor first tweeted this a few weeks ago that the Clippers had been drumming up interest in Westbrook, possibly the Knicks. And then, of course, last week, Shams Charania reported that Russell Westbrook's representatives wanted to move on. Didn't like the culture there. Westbrook wants the ball back in his hands like the old days in OKC after Kevin Durant left. Surprise, surprise. But rather than ask you what the Rockets can get for him, because I really don't know the value that Westbrook could get at this point, especially with a player as polarizing as him. But I'm also aware that whenever people say this contract's untradeable, I'm thinking, have we not watched the last 20 years of the NBA? Like any contract's tradable. What are some of the best Westbrook teams you think he can be traded to? Some of the more viable ones.
So I have thoughts on Westbrook. So first off, let me say I like Russell Westbrook. I'm a Russell Westbrook fan.
Me too.
I think I love the effort. I love watching him play. I don't want him on a team. If I'm a team, I don't want him. And it's hard for me to say that because, again, I think he's great. I'm a fan of Russell Westbrook as a player. I like to watch. But if I'm a fan of a team, I don't want Russell Westbrook. And it comes down to he takes bad shots. He takes shots that he doesn't make. He has some lapses in defensively. He makes his energy sometimes leads to some careless turnovers and fouls.
One of the most overrated defenders I have ever seen from a superstar position. And I'm not just talking.
It comes down to energy. It comes down to people mistake high energy as good defense.
People mistake him overly aggressively gambling in the passing lanes and getting a thunderous dunk as defense. He is I've always thought he was a bad defender.
And again, I'm shitting on Westbrook right now because I don't think I think he is overrated. I am a fan of Russell Westbrook. Don't get me wrong. I love how hard he plays. I love the attitude he plays with. But man, I don't want him on a team that I like.
A fair point. So I'm a Westbrook centrist. So I'm a fan of Russell Westbrook. He is absolutely electric to watch. Loved watching him his whole career. I thought there was maybe a point where he could have been a tier 1 franchise player, especially earlier in his career. But
he never grew past it. He never grew past and grew to like be the veteran savvy that we expected to have. He plays with the same fire and the same kind of young energy and enthusiasm, which is something that I love about him, but he doesn't have his basketball IQ ain't that high. And
I think he's a smart player. I think he's a very good playmaker actually, but I do think situational awareness has never been his strong suit because he takes bad shots still. He's one of the worst 3-point shooters in NBA history by just point blank period. His free throw percentage has been mysteriously taken a decline the last few years. I will disagree with you though, because I do think there are teams he can play for.
There's one place that I would like him to go.
Okay, what's your team?
I want him to go to the Knicks.
So the Knicks were on my list.
So
because something needs to happen there, right?
So to me, the energy, his enthusiasm, his fire in the Garden would be awesome for the NBA.
If fans even are allowed to come in this season,
right? but like even him in the Knicks orange and blue looks cool.
Oh
and
yeah,
I would love to see that. He's like that going back to like the 90s, like, not bad boy Knicks teams, but like, the bully Knick teams, like the high energy, high motor.
He's a culture setter.
Go
like for
right.
sure.
And putting him with a guy like Julius Randle, who has kind of that same kind of play style, and having him imbue some of that aggression into RJ Barrett, I think would be really good.
I mean, yeah, because RJ Barrett is kind of the same. Like in terms of mentality, I think it's him and Westbrook are the same because he takes the game. It seems like he has he always plays with this scowl on his face. He obviously hates losing. I just hope Tom Thibodeau doesn't run him into the ground more than the Knicks already were last year. I think Barrett was averaging like over 40 minutes a game, and Tom Thibodeau is going to try to make him average like 50 minutes if he could.
Oh, I was laughing. I have a couple of RJ Barrett Prism rookie cards graded and ready to go. And I was telling someone, I was like, dude, depending on how this year goes, I might cash out on these RJ Barrett rookie cards.
One of my best friends actually started basketball card collecting too, and which is pretty funny. I'm gonna have to. I'm looking into that myself. But
I've been doing it for a while now, so I can help you out there. But I was looking at it and I was like, man, maybe I should cash out on these RJ Barretts.
I think the Knicks would be a fun one. I think there is a case to be made that the Clippers will actually be a good fit for Westbrook. And I've been talking myself into this the last few days. So the ideal team around Westbrook, which he never really had in Oklahoma City, even with him and Kevin Durant, is you surround Russell Westbrook with defenders, 3-and-D defenders, and shooting. And we talk about how last year, I think some of the problems with the Clippers offense, one, included constant load management, not enough time to build chemistry, but also there were too many cooks in the kitchen, and not any one of those cooks were an advanced playmaker.
Right.
And I think Westbrook fits the bill for that job. Now, obviously, Ty Lue is going to be pulling his hair out if Westbrook does, because Westbrook is going to keep doing some of the dumb Westbrook shit we have seen in his career. But I do think when you're talking about it, a team like the Clippers, who had way too many cooks in the kitchen and not enough shots going to Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, while we watched Lou Williams get absolutely eaten alive in the playoffs and still being left on the court to run the offense for some reason. I do think having Westbrook on the Clippers funnels the shots and the time of possession with the ball to the right players. Now,
sure, I think so as a Laker fan, I would love for the Clippers to get Russell Westbrook.
I know you would.
the concern to me would be what they would have to give up to obtain Russell Westbrook. They have no draft capital, so they have to give up some assets in terms of young players or just like good bench players. Mm-hmm. And then it eviscerates their bench. Yeah. And then at that point, they would have almost no bigs to contain Anthony Davis or Jokic, like what we were talking about earlier. That's how you're going to win the Western Conference at this point.
Right.
And then the thing is, if you can get like a Rajon Rondo off the free agent pool, wouldn't you just rather do that?
That is true. I guess it's one of those things where, does Steve Ballmer want the star power, or does he want more insurance in terms of scoring in the playoffs in case Paul George flames out again? Because I think Kawhi's going to be there. And I have to say, as a longtime member of the Paul George fan club, Zach Lowe always called Paul George a boss. I turned in my Paul George membership fan club card this year.
I called him being a bust a long time ago.
I don't think he's a bust. I'll push back on the bust part.
Not bust. I think he's a choker.
He was trying to be a tier 1 franchise player that he maybe could have pulled off in Indiana before the leg injury, but I think is now more of a 1. And I think now, honestly, he's a 2 or a 2.5, because my boy has just come up too short in the playoffs now for the last few years, and then he gave himself the nickname Playoff P, which you never do. Never give yourself a nickname unless you're Kobe. But it's just I see Westbrook with the Clippers, and I think that's a move where it could possibly fix maybe the offensive structure a little bit. You'd probably have to bring back Zubac, who I think is a solid player. You're gonna have to hope that you can maybe get a big in the draft, to maybe kind of to help supplement that. But I see Westbrook and the Clippers as a fit. I also see the Orlando Magic as a fit just because of the same thing. Dude, granted, Jonathan Isaac's healthy. Mo Bamba actually starts showing me something and is not injured all the time. I just look at that situation also, and they need somebody like a Westbrook who, one, can set the tone offensively. You know who's going to get the ball. You don't have to piecemeal it together with DJ Augustine and Evan Fournier and trying to run a lot of stuff through Vucevic. Also, it makes Vucevic's role easier, who I think is a really good player. I also think if Jonathan Isaac, please, if he can ever stay healthy, that's the perfect type of player you put next to Westbrook, somebody who can guard multiple positions and hit a spot up three. I really like the Clippers and the Magic more so than the Knicks. I think the Knicks for me is more fun and just shaking things up because the Knicks, as we know, haven't really been.
Knicks need to win. Knicks
need something to go for them. They struck out on Kevin Durant. They've been striking out on free agents.
Could you imagine if the Knicks got LaMelo too, and they just ran the floor? You know how fun it'd be to watch. They'd be a tier 1 league pass team.
It'd be such an odd fit, but I'm here for it, honestly. RJ Barrett, LaMelo Ball, and Westbrook on the same team. Just running.
Get to the basket, boys.
See Westbrook yelling at LaMelo Ball whenever he tries a 3/4 court shot. No.
They're just taking turns, taking half-court shots. My
turn. Real quickly, I don't think you could get anything of value for Westbrook, right? At this point, no. Like you don't see like maybe the Knicks giving back like the Knicks and Nixian fashion, giving back a pick or two for Westbrook or anything like that.
Frank Ntilikina, if you want.
I think he needs to get to a good coach, Frank Ntilikina. The island is shrinking really rapidly. The water is overflowing, but I'm going to stand on Ntilikina Island because I think he's a good defender. And I think he has the potential to be a great defender and kind of like a secondary guard on offense. Not too special, but I just think you can't give up on that defensive ability and given the situation that he's in. But
I think at most you get like Ntilikina and maybe like Kevin Knox, and that's about it.
Yeah, I don't think. Okay, yeah. So I don't think Westbrook's contract is an albatross, but yeah, you're not going to get anything back.
It's not an albatross, but it doesn't hurt given where he is in his career and the player that he is. It doesn't help.
Yeah. Real quickly, where do you what are some of your teams that you see Jrue Holiday going to? I know there's been some trade rumors around Jrue Holiday. Obviously, it's looking like they're trying to clear some cap space, and also just trying to cash in on Jrue Holiday, who is one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA, and also a really solid offensive player. But what teams do you like him going to?
So the favorite so far is to the Celtics. This is the favorite that came out today.
They would be nasty if the Celtics got Jrue Holiday and somehow got off Gordon Hayward. I'd be scared
that's the swap people are talking about it. Gordon Hayward for Jrue Holiday. Gordon Hayward and some picks for Jrue Holiday.
Yeah, that would be Marcus Smart, Jrue Holiday, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and Robert Williams or Daniel Tice. Or you can honestly, I don't know how difficult it would be to swing a trade for Steven Adams, especially once Brown and Tatum's contracts start coming in, their contract extensions kick in. But the Celtics, even though, like we were talking about earlier, while they were while we talked about how maybe they didn't maximize their asset war chest, they have been to the conference finals 3 out of the last 4 years, and they're still in the mix to be able to maneuver and do some stuff around the draft. So Jrue Holiday to the Celtics, that would terrify me. If the Sixers did not get James Harden, I could see them trying to swing a trade for Jrue Holiday. I honestly think nobody talks about this, but except for Sixers land, but I think Josh Richardson is the number one trade asset right now that Daryl Morey is flinging around. I think he's the only player of value that they could trade around, a 3-and-D guard who is on a very, very, very affordable contract for this and expiring too. So a team could later maybe flip Josh Richardson again. Also, the Bucks make a lot of sense for Jrue Holiday, especially since they've been in the mix for Chris Paul before the Phoenix Suns trade happened. If Jrue Holiday could take Eric Bledsoe's minutes, that's a godsend for the Bucks. Yeah. And those are really the only two teams I could think about right now. Nuggets, obviously, too. That would be a fun one. That's more.
I mean, pretty much any contender would love to have Jrue Holiday.
Yeah, the Mavericks would love to have Jrue Holiday on
absolutely
their team too.
But again, like the tricky part with Jrue Holiday and the tricky part with where we're at in the league is, again, the salary cap stuff that we keep talking about, and the fact that Giannis is a free agent next year. Yeah, and the fact that these next two drafts are insane. So you don't want to give up too much to either take yourself out of the Giannis race, and you don't want to hurt your chances of getting one of these top kids that are coming in. So, how much does this the only teams that I can think of are the ones that are on the bubble that are.
Wait. We have something here. So Adrian Wojnarowski, as of 8 minutes ago, sources, after turning down an extension offer to become the first $50 million a year player in league history, James Harden's message to Houston is clear: get me to Brooklyn. Rockets and Nets have been in contact, but there has been no meaningful dialogue.
Oh, baby, they're going to do it.
So it sounds like Harden has his mindset on the Nets.
Is he playing hardball?
Oh my God.
Is he hard in or hard out?
Oh my God. We have a pun master on the BOB podcast.
Hard in and hard out is going to be the chapter tag for this.
That's gonna be a headline forever now. But trade season, baby.
I'm into it.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we have the draft coming up in 2 days. There's a lot going on there. We're going to talk about that next week, and then we'll see how all these trades shake out. We should see a lot more trades on Wednesday when the draft happens and when all the stuff opens up. So.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I'm excited.
Can't wait.
All right, Jordan. I think that's it for today. Any closing thoughts? Any closing words?
So it looks like my bet will be put off for another day. And I won't lose Ben Simmons for a week or so. We'll see. Harden can say whatever he wants, but Morey, is probably going to be pulling some strings there. But I'm excited, man. The second episode of the BOB podcast. Excited to continue this podcast and podcasting it with you. So I'm excited. It's all good vibes around here. 2020 is ending on a few bright notes out of the crazy year we've had. So
absolutely. So guys, enjoy the draft, enjoy the start of free agency, and thank you for enjoying Box Out Banter.
The BOB.